Okay, we're live.
Excellent. All right.
Okay, so I guess I'll get us started then. We're going to be talking about, yes, to be or not to be in core, putting in just general discussion about modules inside of the core or node.js releases. So it was an issue that was opened up, issue number 1041. So we don't really have an agenda, I guess. We can just kind of get started on, I think a couple people had some things they wanted to put on the table, and then we can kind of just go from there.
Just trying to open the issue. So I was watching the previous video where Mary was mentioning something about how if this were to become a regular thing that we start doing, we should probably define some criteria here, saying like this is only justifiable under certain circumstances or something like that, or something along those lines. I'm not sure.
I mean, I think there's two things we want to sort out here is what is the, as you say, what is the criteria to be included in core?
Right.
And in what form do we include modules into core?
I'm sorry, what was that second part you said?
The second part, in what form, how do we include external
modules? Oh, right, exactly.
Right.
And it is related because I think over the time we've also discussed things like, does a standard library make any sense? So there's different ways that you might say it's part of Node, but whether core, or whether it's a separate set of libraries, or some other idea that we come up with.
Yeah, we have that util module, which unfortunately almost everything is deprecated there. I sort of want to breathe life back into that thing. But that could start serving as a standard library, the util module that we have.
When I mentioned a standard library, what I meant was something that isn't necessarily bundled into core itself, but is like, that would be the distinction in my mind anyway. Now you can, again, definitions are key. It's more like, here's a set of packages which are somehow supported by the project. Maybe you get them with Node or not, but they're not necessarily as tightly bundled into core as other modules.
Oh, potentially like a core pack option. Maybe the packages are downloaded upon request or something.
Well, if we just, if we take a step back, like the question, why would we include something in core?
Right.
Like, why would we do that? So the one of the primary reasons I see is it's not possible to implement in user because it requires access to know the internals.
Right, like, into core. Yeah, I think we have kind of like this. So yeah, here that's like only possible if integrated, right?
Yeah. And then anything beyond that is kind of more psychology, I think, than any technical reason.
I guess it depends what you mean by possible. Like, you could say it's significantly more performant, because I think that's a reason that we've used as well.
You mean through snapshots?
Well, no, that like if you integrate, so something might be possible to do, but the performance is much poorer than if you integrated it in, right? So,
yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Performance is kind of like, significantly, I'm just writing that,
diminished,
better.
I guess that's an extension reason of the previous one.
Yeah, one of the reasons that Matteo gave was that, well, justifying another one of these dependencies is that so many core APIs depend on it. I think he was maintaining.
Yeah, that's actually, if we say that's another reason there is.
Yeah, that could be
when Node Core depends on that functionality.
Yeah.
think another one that's been discussed in the past too is if there's native code. Like if you need native code, then a module which has to be compiled, installed,
Yep.
and work and like support across all of our platforms. If it's really important, that's actually a significant burden to a large number of people. Not that every native module needs to be integrated, but that can lead into the discussion as well.
Yep.
Yeah, inconvenience, I guess, would be the word.
Yeah, and then there are, if you go on the inconvenience is but then it's a bit more softer values, like it's easier for users if they don't have to npm install it.
Yeah, but
Right,
imagine if you had to compile it though. On top of installing, you have to compile it. That's even worse.
But that gets a little softer.
What were you gonna say, Mike? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Robert.
Keep going.
I just know Michael started to say something on that.
Yeah, I think it was like, just because it's like that, everything's easier if it's bundled in. So I think it's like you said, it's softer. It's like not everything, but there is a point where like, if it's something everybody is going to use, then, this is where like, I guess the discussion around NPM has been, right? Like if you're always going to have we shouldn't go there necessarily, but like if there's something everybody is going to use and so everybody is going to install it, then why force an external install potentially?
The other situation there is that if I start writing an app and I require, at node.js/Undici, like regardless of naming, that part doesn't matter. If I go and install that and it's not in my package JSON as a dependency, because that's a thing that'll happen, the package managers won't go fetch it. I don't think we want to get in the business of doing static code analysis to figure out what dependencies our users have and then doing
Oh no, we would use the node URL thing. What is it called? The node protocol for the specifier for the core modules. But one of the requirements should be that if a lot of other core modules depend on this particular dependency, that's one of the other justifications right there.
Right, but what I'm saying, I think that's orthogonal to what I'm saying. Like if it's not bundled in node core, the node core the node specifier will then will have to go do network requests, which I don't know if we want to be having like an additional surface for network requests going out that's outside of a package manager that's going and fetching packages. Like that seems like a nightmare for people who have to take care of network stuff.
Yeah,
there are people who are like in disconnected networks. So
yeah, exactly.
I have like this not having to npm install reason. I would like to argue that should be excluded. I think a good example of that is, for example, streams in Node. Or is that actually? Yeah, okay, that's a bit of a special reason, but yeah, we can take that one. So the problem we have with streams today, it's very difficult to fix stuff, and especially fix them backwards, because the fix might break something inside of Node core. So even though it would be safe for users to upgrade it for their code, or they can fix that, we can't provide them with that option because of problems we have inside of core.
So how is that module pulled in now? Do you have any idea? It's like
no, streams are implemented in core.
Oh.
And then we copy paste that out into an npm package.
What is the reason for that? Why do you pull it out? I don't understand.
Because what he just said.
Yeah, but actually it doesn't work so well because it takes a lot of work to do it. There are two reasons. The practical reason today is, so that users, we don't break users' code when they upgrade Node versions, right? The secondary theoretical reason is we can fix users' code without them having to upgrade Node versions. And then you leave
I see.
You leave that decision to users.
So you only make the upgrade on a breaking node change, like a breaking node version change, is when you make your changes to the stream.
No, well, it also allows people to require a different version.
Yeah.
That like they can require a future version than the one, like a newer version than the one that their node runtime has, and consume it that way. So they can have the one with fixes without changing node core. Like node core can use the one with the broken one, and they can use the ecosystem one. Yeah,
I see.
So you kind of are able to decouple the node version, because often, you know, when we do a node version, it includes a lot of different changes. You know, you go to version 17, and then you have to get all the changes, you know, all the same very major changes. But if you can decouple it, you can choose, okay, I just want the same very major changes on streams because I need those.
I think we might be
I see.
getting a little bit off topic here.
Sorry.
And
Well,
should
no,
reset her.
this is
No, you're
actually
fine.
this is very relevant, because we would need to know, like, if we have these external dependencies being pulled in, when there's a breaking change, like when do we get to upgrade these if they're being pulled in? Can we only make a breaking change on a breaking node LTS change, or a breaking node change?
I agree.
We would upgrade these if we you know, we would upgrade the third-party dependency versions that we include in core with several major versions.
I see.
Right, but users still have the choice to, you know, upgrade that specific part of node.
Yeah, I see. That's an interesting thing you guys got going there.
So, I mean, I think along those lines, it's like, you know, I guess I don't know if we want to like a reasons not to, but it's you definitely have a downside of, you know, in terms of frequency of updates, how quickly you can respond, can you update independently? And it's sort of like if the benefit of that is outweighed by all the other things, is maybe the.
Because here's, for example, something you guys can convince me of. If we exclude the fetch part of Untitled, I don't really see, from a technical perspective, any reason to include it into core. I only see downsides of that. It makes it more difficult to update, more difficult to, you know, push out fixes. Development velocity will go down, etc., etc. So why should why should I put a lot of work into including Untitled into core?
Well, how far along is the fetch implementation? Because I saw there was work started on that, right?
Yeah, I just released the first experimental version today, so it's published on NPM.
Nice. I gotta try that out.
And I announced it on Twitter, so feel free to try that out. But that actually needs kind of node core internals, which is why I said, like, disregard that part.
Right.
So because disregard that part, and then just, you know, why should I include our library as Untitled into core?
I mean,
I don't think we try to convince you, right? We're usually on the opposite side of, like, somebody says, hey, this should be in core, and people are like, you know, I think our tendency is to say we want to keep things small. The smaller the surface area, the easier it is for the project to maintain it. Everything that we pull in comes with the, hey, now it needs to be maintained more strictly, more longer time. So unless there is some good reasons, my take is like, no, we shouldn't, right?
Then I will put on the other hat, you know. Why should it be in core?
Wait, I have a question though. When we build the actual binary for node, is there any way we can pull in the dependency at that point rather than pulling in all of this code? Like,
I mean, that's what we do with npm and CRS and all of those other dependencies we have.
Because I think it would be strange to start receiving pull requests to fix Untitled in the node core repo.
Well, they need to be relatively, like, we have those dependencies, but we do run into cases where, like, people report an issue to us, and if they're not actively maintained, you know, we need to then potentially float patches and stuff. But I guess that there are a number, like the HTTP parser, which is a separate project, and we generally take a PR there and then pull it in when we need something. But
there is some precedence.
Yeah, those ones tend to be relatively stable. right? Like, I don't think the HTTP parser we upgrade all that often, except for, oh, well, there's a security vulnerability or something like that.
So I think all these discussions are good. I don't see us working towards some kind of like takeaway, either a to do. I don't see us making progress towards like either a to do or like a decision on anything or,
Oh, we're
or a
still
recommendation.
exploring. We're still exploring the space. There's a lot to consider.
How long is this meeting?
An hour.
Yeah, so we're halfway through. We're still exploring, and we're not. I just want to make sure that we don't spend an hour exploring, and then not walk away like having wasted 6 people's time, and not get to a point where
Well, we
have something we
still
can
have
do.
a lot of time for Node Fetch, their implementation to actually finish their beta testing before we need to make a decision.
I'm not necessarily talking about node fetch. Like I've been following that. I'm familiar with that. I'm just more concerned that we're not moving in a direction that is having some kind of outcome here. And I want to make sure. I just want to make sure we're spending this time effectively.
I think our outcome is a doc which says, like Robert had asked, like, could we have some more doc that says, here's when you might consider it to go in and or not, right? Is that right, Robert?
Yeah, and that's where I'm trying to come to. Like,
yeah,
why would we include? And then, you know, I just said, like, and this is just an example. That's not the core issue here. Like, why would we include something? Now, there is no, as I see, the technical reasons for that case, for example, are not really there. So what would be other reasons to include a module into core? And I guess that could be, you know, visibility, that, you know, this is under the Node.js umbrella, please use this.
Yeah, I don't know if you're looking at the minutes. I created like a primary reason list and a secondary reason list where I'm trying to capture a bit of what we had. Like, I think what you just said, I tried to kind of cover under like signaling trust, integrated testing validation. So it's like, it gives it more strength in terms of like, hey, it's part of the project, therefore you can trust it more. Is that what you had in mind, or something different?
The follow-up to that is, you know, is the only way to do that by including it into core.
Right.
Right. So that also feels like a little, you know, reason.
Definitely, like, you know, but what are our other? We should maybe write down what are our other possibilities for that.
Wait, can I ask you a question? There has to be some other use for it other than having fetch, right? Like, what else can we do with it if it's in core?
The problem we have now with HTTP in core is that we kind of don't want people to use the existing HTTP client.
Right.
And we want them to move over to Untitled. How do we do that? Well, one of the suggestions was we'll move it into core. And that's kind of where this whole thing started out.
So can we rename, or is there no sort of clashing between the old API and what Untitled HTTP would provide?
They're totally different.
Yeah, totally different.
Yeah,
I think you come back to a little bit of what you mentioned is there's also an issue of timing, right? Like if you know, the downsides you said are also the, you know, less, if there's lots and lots of changes going on, it may be harder to make those changes if it's in core versus in its own module. That could change over time though. Like there might come a point where that's no longer as much of a drawback.
Yeah. So, and if you look at the list that I have there, some in the issue, examples where it's unclear whether things should be in core or not. Those are things that have been discussed or actually have been included into core. And
where's that list?
At the top of the issue.
In core in the
okay.
issue. There's a list of a few different, you know, modules that either are being discussed to be included in core or have been included in core. And based on that list, of course, again, excluding fetch, I see no technical reason for any of those to be included into core.
Well, I think we need to be documenting all of these APIs that come in the runtime. Like, of course, npm is a separate command and everything, so we can leave that third party. But if we have a core API, we need to document it, and like that would be the responsibility of the documentation team. And if they don't do it, then that's TSC's responsibility.
Yeah, but you could still document it outside of, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
core.
was wondering, how do you plan on going about doing that? Do you guys already have docs? I haven't even looked at it, to be honest.
If you're back at Undici, then yes, we have. I think it lives on the Undici .node.js.org.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow. Nice.
So, I mean, you were about to put your other hat on, right? Because your first hat was like, well, it doesn't need to be in core.
Yes. So the other hat is, you know, okay, SIT-GM, you know, stability over time. How do we do that with modules that live outside of core? You know, coding standards and, you know, style and test frameworks and stuff like that. Do we want to have, you know, should that be unified? And then, of course, it is the, you know, visibility for users, because users that use Node.js, they will always go into the documentation and prefer using things there. And
Yeah,
in
the
the
coding
Unity case,
style
you know,
issue, that is a serious issue, the coding style thing. What do you don't like what we have in core, or haven't compared? What do you guys have?
I think we use standard JS.
Really? Do you use semicolons?
No semicolons.
No semicolons. Oh my God. Yeah, please put semicolons.
But again, I don't personally care so much about that.
Those kinds of things, like, so those things you're mentioning could, like you said, there's other ways to achieve those, right? Versus being directly in core itself.
Yeah.
Like if we basically said, we, you know, those repos live in the node org, even though they're not in core, we could then also say, well, all these repos share, you know, coding conventions, that kind of stuff, share the CI. We could even create, like we created the PKGS org, we could create another org, which would be like, I don't know, you could name it whatever that made sense. And, you know, the expectation in that org is everything conforms to these standards, just like they would in
Yeah,
core.
like a style guide repo, like a JS style guide repo. We sort of need that for Markdown too. That sounds
And,
really
you know,
interesting to me, actually.
And that would be a different level of that signaling part, like, you know, the signaling that things are part of the project, if not in Node itself, right? Like, you know, it's a little bit stronger perhaps, but not as strong as it's built in.
But what I do think, you know, even if we have the project itself separately, they somehow have to get into the core docs.
Right, and that would be an easier, like if they're, so for example, you look at Node add-on API.
Yeah.
There are definitely references to that in the Node core docs.
Yep.
And so that's a module which is a project. It's another repo within the main project. It's not integrated to core, but there are references to it in terms of like, hey, here's how you make your native add-ons. Here's, you know, there's the core API that is integrated, but then there's this other module which you can use from C++.
Yep.
That's interesting. How do you keep those docs up to date? You just frequently update the Markdown files, or?
Well, it's a completely separate, like when you mean up to date, then the Node add-on API docs are separate.
Oh, they're not even on node.js.org?
No. So basically, you know, but the ones, the core docs reference out to them, to the docs for that project.
Oh, I see.
And if those get out of date, is that whose responsibility is that? If, since they're so, even the docs, I feel like there's still a responsibility to the people that are maintaining the core docs to make sure that all of the docs that are kind of like linked outward are up to date and correct.
Well, we could definitely synchronize the Markdown files between the core repo and the upstream wherever they live. if you just like run a cron job to synchronize the docs so that
the
we have like this
challenge-
unified experience, you know.
The challenge is I can't give you a set of names of people responsible for doing the docs, right? Like that's just whoever does the docs or does PRs or
It's
as a
mainly
project.
it's mainly contributors, actually, random people.
Exactly. Like that's we don't, when somebody said earlier, it's the responsibility of X, it's more of the project has a responsibility and
It's a group effort.
yeah, exactly. So it's not like we can, and it being, mostly
Yeah.
volunteer driven, we can't like give somebody, hey, you must do this or anything like that. But I don't think that that's super different. The key thing is that we need project, if we're going to refer to something, it needs to be something the project overall is comfortable, will have enough attention, be continued to maintained and so forth, right? But
So I'm looking at the docs right now. It looks like we do have an API docs in core. It's not referencing anywhere elsewhere, which is what I seem to
there's two
recall.
sets. There's two sets. Like Node API is supported, like a C version is supported directly in core.
Yeah.
And then Node add-on API is an external C++ module that you can use. And that is referenced in the docs through some links in addition to the core APIs.
Yeah, I don't traverse this part of the site very often. Yeah. I don't know if that would be an acceptable approach for Undici, if we can have like some sort of a hybrid model, some more permanent content living in the core repo, and then maybe like the reference API docs, which change often. I wonder if you guys use JSDoc.
For me, the optimal would be, we create the docs in Undici and those get pulled. That doesn't work either. How that work with versions and etc. That's where it becomes a little tricky, right? Because you have different versions of Undici that has different documentation. Which version do you link?
Right.
Oh, true.
That's where, like, if it's, once something if it becomes the way that the project tells people to use HTTP, like eventually, in my mind, maybe, and it's a replacement for the others, you start to get into these other things that argue more favorably for saying, well, if it's a core part of the runtime, maybe it should just be part of it, right? But if it's new and experimental,
Yeah, I imagine this is probably going to be working behind the scenes most of the time, and we would probably have a more prominent or more appropriately named module. I don't know, like HTTP next or something. I don't know.
We can rename the project. That's not a problem.
I
could
I was
imagine.
I was under the impression that this is basically operating on like lower levels of HTTP stuff, like behind the scenes stuff. Is that not right?
It replaces the low-level HTTP parsing logic and everything. So
Yeah.
we're using WebAssembly to make that happen.
Oh, nice.
So we don't have
so
any
the lower levels. So like the front-facing API for HTTP wouldn't necessarily need to change.
Oh, yes, it would. The API itself is broken.
Oh dear.
There are problems there we can't fix with the current API. So the API is it's a replacement for both the API and the underlying engine, so to say.
Wow. I need to do my research. Sounds interesting.
But we can take another example, like the MIME module. Should that live in core?
Oh, right. What happened with that?
Well, I think it got stalled on whether or not it should be included in core.
and I guess, what would the arguments be in favor of it?
Well, I guess it's a commonly used thing, I guess. I don't use it, but
Yeah, like that's where if it just because it's broad use, there's lots of modules with like tons of use, right?
yeah.
I feel, the MIME is more about, okay, this is the module we recommend to use for MIME related stuff.
Yeah, that seems like a good justification actually.
But then you could do that by putting it.
I think we use MIME stuff in core as well, like with the module, the new module system we have. I'm pretty sure we have MIME type stuff going on, or at least we probably will be in the near future. There are some ECMAScript proposals that are going to be making
But
use of that.
that's good. Okay, we have a module. We want to use it inside of core. That was one of the reasons we say
that's going to be a similar.
It's
going to be a similar. It's going to be a similar scenario actually. The MIME module, we might need to depend on that in the future.
How do we include it?
That's a good question.
Like, should it live in the node source code, in our source tree, or is it a module that we pull in when we're, a specific version of when we're building node?
Yeah, I would prefer if we pulled it in.
Me too.
Just like you said, it slows down the velocity of development if it's in core.
But then you come to the zip GM, etc. But I guess you could do that anyway.
The flip side example, just to throw it out there, was node inspect. So node inspect was a separate module. It was pulled in separately. But more recently, it's kind of been integrated in. Now, again, maybe that was a point in time, like it started out being external and being pulled in, but eventually it got integrated because we found there was a number of times it was actually broken. And, we weren't really paying enough attention to it. So then it was like, let's bring it in so that it's integrated into core, and it's, we're going to find out sooner.
How were you pulling it into core before it was actually moved in officially? Like, how was that working before? Do you know?
I didn't actually ever do it myself, but like there was a separate repo and part of the, would need to be pulled in.
I made the mistake of modifying the inspect code in core once, and then someone told me, oh, this source code is actually in a separate repo. And I was modifying code in depths, I think.
Right, so that would make sense. That there was a copy in depths.
Maybe we have something in the make file that pulls it in. I don't know. There's probably a make file command to pull in depths.
But
that's a discussion that we had several times, and there are people who want the depths to be in core so that you can just download the table and build it without internet connection.
Yes.
Going back to what was the reason for including it in core? Was it just psychological that, if it wasn't fully included, integrated in core, we didn't, give it enough love? Or, what was the technical?
Yeah, it was broken and no one fixed it. I guess you could say no love.
Yes, like that. Nobody was actively working on the separate repo.
Okay, so then that's purely a psychological reason. I'm not saying that's a bad reason. I'm just trying to understand.
It's a behavioral reason, maybe.
Yeah.
Like core gets more attention, more prominence, more whatever.
So then we have, attention versus velocity.
Right.
Because if the external project does have attention, then it has higher velocity. But if it can easily lose attention, and then you get the opposite effect.
Right. And that's kind of where, like, over time the answer may change, right? Like doing it that way made sense for a while, and it makes sense for any depths that we don't as a project maintain. Like, we're not going to pull in V8 and maintain that ourselves, but like effectively the project was maintaining node inspect and was the only user. So having two copies slowly didn't make as much sense.
Then we have a potential additional condition here when we pull something into core is, when the external project has stalled. then
Yeah,
it
I
might
mean,
make sense to pull it in.
Right.
that would definitely make sense.
I just want to point out we have 14 minutes left. So if we want to like, I don't know, move towards some sort of action item, I don't think there's going to be a resolution, but yeah, maybe some action items for this.
regarding-
even if it's
I
just
want to see how the fetch implementation with this dependency works out before we can make a decision, I think, because that would be the justification for putting in core in the first place, right? Well, also HTTP, but I want to see this thing working. You know?
I think
Yeah,
the
but that's
start.
specific to Undici. That's not the general question.
Oh well.
I think we should target a guide, like even if it's like a few lines, like as a next step that says, you know, when just capturing like some of this, like reasons that things would make sense to be integrated into core. Like, does that? Because I think that's, Robert, where you started with, was like,
Yep.
well, how do I even know, right? So even if we don't have the complete picture, having a doc where we could then add to and whatever coming out of this discussion would be a
But,
tangible outcome.
I think I had those two primary points. You know, when do we include it and how do we include it?
Right.
If we could make some, you know, a bullet list of just what
Yep.
are our thoughts right now of when we include it, you know, maybe with some comments, and then, you know, how do we include it, right?
And if I don't know if you've opened the minutes doc that Daniel provided, but you know, you could
have
type
it in
in. I typed in some stuff there that
Yeah.
we have a starting there for the when.
And there's something I would like to talk about. It's if we don't include it in core, what happens with LTS releases?
Say it again.
Because there's what happens with the LTS releases of Node Core. Because for the modules that are in core, we can very easily pull patches that are not Semver major. I mean, it happens automatically. But if it's a dependency, like if Undici is developed outside of core and makes a breaking change, then the next releases are not going to be we are not going to be able to pull them into LTS.
Yeah, we would have to like
So-
cherry pick the security fixes into whatever code base is inside of the deps folder, I think. Right?
Wouldn't Undici,
Yeah, so-
release a patch on that same version that LTS version is using?
Sorry?
So let's say the LTS version is using Undici version 12, and
Yeah.
the current version is 15. And then there's a problem in LTS, and then, you know, Undici would release a 12.0.1 that the LTS version could pull in.
Yeah, then we would
Yeah,
cherry
but
pick the
that
commit.
makes
Cherry
that
pick
puts
the commit.
puts the burden of the Undici maintainers.
Yeah, and all Node.js contributors are Undici maintainers. Whether it's inside of core or outside of core doesn't really matter. It's under the Node.js umbrella.
Well, we'll probably hear from
So
HackerOne about
Undici
this.
would make sure that there are LTS supported versions.
Yeah,
that pull
Undici
fixes.
or Node.js core, Node.js would make sure there are Undici fixes. Like Undici lives under the Node.js organization. All contributors to Node.js are also contributors to Undici.
Yeah, I understand. But my point is that most of the fixes that we pull into LTS right now, they are just pulled automatically by our tooling. Nobody has to do a lot of work to pull them in.
But the tooling could then, you know, if the Semver version is 12, you know, pull in the latest patch version.
I think what it would require, like it would be just like, if it's in a depths, it would be just like any other depths where somebody has to create a PR to say upgrade the Undici version in the depths, you know, based on some version in the external depths repo, right?
Yeah, we would have to have the Undici code base in the core repo. Whether or not you guys actively develop it there is, up to you. But
Yeah, well, I'm more talking about pulling the patches from Undici, from the main branch of Undici to the LTS branch of Undici.
yeah, I know what you're saying. Who's going to do it?
So yeah, but the question is not who's gonna do it, but do we require that someone does it in order to accept it into core?
That's a difficult requirement because somebody could accept that, but 2 months later life changes and you move on, and then we
Yeah, but then Undici becomes broken on some LTS version of Node, and people have to upgrade or have to use the npm module.
Well,
To have
what was going on?
the version that works.
What was going on with inspect? Because I mean, we can look at history here. That one was broken. Any idea what happened on the
I mean,
LTS?
I think the
LTS
problem
side?
there was the duplicate maintenance. So like, it could be broken in the other repo, nobody would notice. We tried to do an
Oh, yeah.
upgrade and it would be, so it wasn't necessarily broken in terms of what was in the core, but you have your dual maintenance. I think, Michael, your point is a key point, is to just, regardless of how you include it, the project's making a commitment to LTS support for those APIs, right? Like, whether it's bundled in directly or it's pulled in through a depths, we're going to have to somehow keep it up to date. And I guess your key point in particular is the depths way is actually harder and more work, right?
Well, who's in the networking team? Isn't there a team for this? I mean, I would think a team would be on top of it, especially if there are Undici developers on the team.
I think it comes back to what Robert said. There's no guarantees that any individual can continue and
Yeah.
But to be fair, we have the same problem in core. Like we have included.
Oh yeah.
We have included HTTP2 in core, but
yeah,
and it has problems, but nobody's really doing anything.
That's kind of what I'm saying, is like, it's regardless of how we pull it in, whether it's depths or directly, we have the same issue. Right? Like, pulling anything in, and that's why there's a reluctance, right? It's like pulling anything in is a long-term commitment on the project to keep the thing working.
I think the main complaint about putting it in core from the Undici developers' point of view is that the CI takes forever to run. They don't agree with our code style. But what else is there really? Like, if we got the CI to only test Undici stuff instead of running the whole barrage of tests, which take forever, do you think that would be something you guys would be interested in? Like, if we were somehow able to?
It certainly would help, but I mean, the other reasons is then we're limited by the node.js release cycle.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Like if now I could release an experimental version of fetch just like that. If I had to do that through core, that would have taken at least a few weeks, if not months.
I think that's actually a positive aspect of developing it outside, and then once you guys have hardened the API and you're confident, then you say, hey, we want to start putting this in core. I sort of like the idea. I just feel bad that you guys are going to have to wait for all of the CI checks to pass, and I don't know what else is really not attractive.
But I think that it's the flip side, is the overall collaborator base doesn't just want to take everything that could be in.
But see, look what NPM does. They have like their own version, release cycles, and every so often they pull in their latest version or whatever. I think
I'm not sure that's the best example. We have lots of security releases that are forced because of NPM and having pulled that in, and like, there's at least some people who'd prefer we didn't have it as integrated because of the grief we get.
What other dependencies are similar? Like, we have ICU in there as well, which I know that was broken. Acorn.
But we don't expose Acorns API, we only use it.
C-Aries is another example, and we did a release this week driven in part by the C-Aries vulnerability. I guess
UV is in there as well. We should ask how often they synchronize their versions here.
But I also, a key difference with these projects is they're not under our control.
right. That's
So
the big difference. Yeah.
If we need to fix something in CRS, we either have to have a patch in our repo that we always apply when we update or something, or we have to open a PR and hope they will include it, etc. If it lives on the node.js umbrella, then we just fix it in that library and do a new release and include it in node.js. We don't have to wait for any third party.
Yeah. So I sort of like the depths idea.
And there are a few like that, like the HTTP parser. It's a project underneath Node.
So, I think the requirement for this depths option is that the project has to move over to the Node.js organization.
Yeah.
Well, other than like, V8 isn't in our organization, so it's not a strict.
That's Google.
But it makes it easier for us to, as a project, to say that, yeah, that's something we could do, right? Like it's easier to say if it's there, we'll have more control. So moving into the depths is maybe an easier discussion.
Well,
in that sense.
Maybe we can work on like a code style guide together so that you feel more comfortable. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's another, little downer for me, because right now I can, for example, run prettier and then standard fix, and I don't have to worry about styling.
Well, if it's a separate repo from core, I don't think people are gonna go after you and say, "Hey, you're not using semicolons." But I sort of find it appealing to have this sort of unified code style. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, but it has to be a code style with the appropriate tooling.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't. It's going to be a trade-off, right? Because as you get closer to being integrated with core, the more you need to be following the approach that all the core collaborators understand, and like that's why there's a coding style, and that's why there's a linter, and having it being something completely different that nobody else understands doesn't really fit the model of, like, if you're trying to pull it further into core, you're doing that so that because you can say we're leveraging all the QA and knowledge across the place, and I don't think you can end up really having it both ways, but
I mean, I don't think anybody is going to object to prettier. It seems to be a pretty common tool nowadays. We might even use it in core eventually. I know other people have expressed interest, at least for using it on the markdown files. But
I mean, there's already a linter, and like, I wouldn't go into any discussion where it says, hey, I want us to integrate this, and by the way, change everything you're doing, right? Like that's not a winning way to make your argument, right? Like,
why not?
If it's kind of like, I think that the list, some of those things in that list are ones where, like, hey, if it's only possible and it's important to have, to make it, if you can make the case that's important functionality, is significantly better performance, or like, the node core depends on it, those are the kind of things that I can see resonating, or you having the discussion. Once it gets to the secondary ones, it's a harder discussion, right? And
well, I don't think anybody's that attached to code style, are they? I mean,
that's the most volatile. If you want to have a 10-year discussion on something, just go poke on that one.
We're kind of out of time, so I think we made some progress, but I think we need more time to actually run through this.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know, Michael, would it make sense to open a new issue or keep in the docs, that we can collaborate a little bit on these lists before the next meeting?
That would, yeah, I think having somewhere where we could do that. I'm even wondering, like, does a PR at all make any sense? That will get a lot more
Maybe a GitHub
people
discussion.
commenting, or maybe a GitHub discussion.
Yeah,
or-
a GitHub discussion about somehow seeing if we can reach some sort of an agreement to a code style. I don't know if you like the Google code style. They have a good JavaScript one.
I
but-
would not touch on code style in any way. That's like
Well, I was
that's
thinking
secondary to this, right?
for the unified, so that all Node.js contributors can actually feel comfortable working on that repo. I don't know. It sounds appealing to me, but we can disregard it if you want.
No, I think that's also a valid discussion, but I think we have the other discussions to take first.
Yeah.
So
Sorry. So yeah, I don't like, I thought you were talking about the Node Core coding standard.
No,
Like,
no. I just sort of want to see if we can reach some sort of agreement where both parties, like Undici and Node. I mean, I don't think the Node code style is super set in stone either. If there are some things that we don't like, we can change it. It's not a big deal. I'm not saying adopt prettier, but I'm saying, like, there are certain things that we can change. It's not set in stone, you know.
but actually this is kind of important as well, because if I have to go through manually and change the coding style of all of Undici.
No, you wouldn't have to do it manually. Of course not.
Okay. But do we have tooling for that?
Absolutely.
Okay, I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's -- fix.
so you were asking, like, the next, like, I think like getting this into the issue or in the doc, or even, like, if we're close enough to have a guide that says, like, here's our list of what would be reasons to be in core, we'll get more broader discussion if we want that at this point, but maybe it's too early.
I think there's these two questions we need to discuss. Why would we include something in core, and how would we include something in core?
Right. I've got to drop off, actually, because I got another meeting, but I will make Danielle, you the host, so that people can continue the discussion, and it'll end when you end the meeting.
I think we're pretty done for now. I mean, I'm still waiting to see how it all turns out with fetch and stuff. I'm excited for it, though. I want to see HTTP built on Undici. It sounds interesting.
Yep. So,
Okay. So really quickly, I guess I just want to have assign people to action items and actually figure what they are out. So Michael said, get this discussion into, I mean, I could probably just stop the recording now too. Actually, he might have stopped. Oh, I'm going to stop the live stream now so we can discuss the action items.